Welcome again to the Yali podcast series. I'm Karthik Matathal, partner at Yali, and I'm honored to introduce today Venu Gopinathan, a former colleague of mine. It's someone that I'm honored to know. In semiconductors, there's a certain kind of engineer that every company wants to, but rarely finds. Someone whose ability spans circuit theory, physics, all the way to the very human nature of problems that he's solving. Most people live at one end or the other, and Venu's very interesting story has spanned all of it. Venu trained at IIT Madras, got his PhD from Columbia, spent years at Texas Instruments, Bell Labs, Broadcom, building the kind of chip expertise which is quite rare. And then at the point in his career where most people would consider just settling down into more and more of the same, he decided to co-found a medical device startup in cardiology. Now, that company, Angiometrics, was eventually acquired, and Venu joined Analog Devices, where he's now a fellow, and also VP of Emerging Business and Innovation, which we'll talk about. Venu, again, it's a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much for that, Karthik. It's great to meet you again. Thank you.
So, how does a chip designer from Bell Labs end up in interventional cardiology?
There was an incident in my life, very early in my married life, when a very close dear one, my son, was actually misdiagnosed with a fairly fatal illness. Thankfully, it was a misdiagnosis. It happened in Texas. And like a first-time immigrant to a brand new country who has never even seen the healthcare system at all, I decided to understand that. And thankfully, my suspicions that it was a misdiagnosis turned out to be true. And I had a part in diagnosing it correctly. But that incident left me changed by it, and I have wondered about it a lot. And I think I wondered, why does somebody like me, who is an engineer by profession, like a very empirical science like medicine? And there again, I found a reason. I come from an analog circuit design point of view. And unlike most other fields of engineering, analog design is closer to being an art in the sense that it doesn't follow any linear thought process. It's a very coagulative thought process in your mind. And I'm sure many good analog designers will tell you, until the last button you press to tape out a chip, you have no idea whether that's going to work or not. In fact, you don't even know if it's going to work until the chip is back. That level of comfort with ambiguity and comfort with sciences that are inexact and very coagulative are exactly the same things that attracted me to analog circuits. And it's also the same things that attracted me to medicine. It is also a very empirical science. It is also very hard to understand. There are too many feedback loops working in the body. And I look back and I think that, hey, that's not surprising. Although from outside it looks that. So that's what brought me into medicine. So after that incident, I kept on reading about it because it was fun. And at some point I wanted to literally go beyond, when I say reading, it went on for over a decade, from 94 to close to 2005, 6. And I wanted to learn something much more practical, and there was no way I could go to a medical school. So then in Bangalore, I managed to find a doctor, actually not in Bangalore, in Belgaum. And I got tutored by him in the hospital. Probably one of the most life-changing things in my career. And that's how I ended up in cardiology. He happened to be a cardiologist. So it was by accident. I don't think I fell into cardiology out of a choice, but it was by accident. It was a beautiful field. And I learned a lot under him.
Awesome. So, a slightly provocative question, right? Is AI in health overestimated, or did we just underinvest in instrumentation? Are we compensating for bad instruments with a lot of fancy computation?
I absolutely don't think that is true. In fact, I almost argue that you could not have picked a better field. And the reason I do say that is because AI is extremely good in pulling out correlations that are not easy for a human mind to see, right? I mean, doesn't fit into a logical framework that biology or even physiology would allow you to do. It's very hard for a human being to look at the number of times you blink and measure the stress in your body. That just doesn't lend itself to a classical medical way of thinking. AI is extremely good in fishing that out. So the first part of your question is, I honestly think AI has a huge role to play in medicine. But I don't think it is because we have under-instrumented ourselves. I think it is because it is just an inherently more difficult problem to solve. I think the best way to answer the question whether you have underinvested in medicine or not is to answer a different question, which is, and this is sort of the way I look at diseases, which is, if every doctor could meet every one of his or her patients every day in the morning and perform an outpatient visit-like thing with the same instruments he had, would you change the trajectory of health of the world? The answer is a profound yes. So it's not the lack of instruments, it is the lack of appropriate use of those instruments at the appropriate times that is a bigger problem to be solved, which is where AI can do, which is where you need infinite number of doctors to do that. So that's sort of the way I answer your two questions.
So you're pointing at the difference between a very accurate one-time measurement and time series data, which which can tell you a lot more than that.
I mean,
that's a very interesting perspective.
Yeah, to take a simple point, which is, we all done analog circuits and Nyquist theory. Doctors undersample you tremendously. And that's basically the problem. It's just not possible.
So, within health, why the heart? Does it have a high signal to noise ratio, or is it just that it's the most important organ for us?
I just happened to be trained by a doc who was a cardiologist, a cardiac surgeon. And since I got more attracted to that, and that's how I ended up in that. That's really the reason. But there is yet another reason why heart is interesting. And that is, it's one of the few organs that if you take the brain, for example, the brain does create electrical signals that you can pick up, but it doesn't have any mechanical signals. It doesn't create any sounds. The liver has biochemical signals. It doesn't move. It doesn't have any electrical signals I can pick up. Neither does it make any sound. Heart is an interesting thing, and lung is also an interesting thing. It has multiple signals that it sends out that allows you to observe that organ in a more fundamentally deep way, which allows you to look at it more carefully, number one. And number two, it is one of the few organs that doesn't regenerate. So if something is going to happen bad with the heart, you better catch it soon. A liver will regenerate. The brain has some capacity to be plastic, and it can rewire itself. Heart is done. You're done. You get a heart attack, that portion of the muscle is gone. So there is a lot of bang for the buck for treating the heart. So those are the reasons why heart tends to hold up a little high in the totem pole of medical profession.
So the heart keeps talking to us in different languages.
Yes.
We just need to listen.
You can listen to it.
So given the fact that there's multimodal data coming at us, to just use an AI buzzword, What does the semiconductor lens reveal that a pure clinician might?
Semiconductors to me is a tool, just like AI is a tool. I think of semiconductors as a means to convert what the language that the heart speaks, the multiple languages that heart speaks, to a form that I can put algorithms on, which ends up reproducing what a doctor would have done. And hence, I can get a virtual doctor without having to have the doctor. That's sort of the way I look at disease management from a device perspective. So, what a doctor can't do is to be available 24/7 for any given patient.
Right.
A semiconductor chip-based technology breaks that boundary fundamentally. And that is a huge deal, humongous deal. Back to the fact that you sample a patient fast enough. From a training point of view, how does a semiconductor chip designer look different from a doctor? If that's a question you're asking, I would say I have an advantage because I don't know what the doctor would think that can't be done. So I'm stupid enough to try various things. And I think that is an advantage. Sometimes it works out.
So let's jump into the problem that you were solving at Angiometrics. What was the problem that you were solving? What did you build?
One advice that I got from a very learned man that I will never forget is engineers like to solve the problems they like rather than the problems that they should. And that distinction is extremely important. And I learned it the very hard way during my stint working for this doctor in Belgaum. In fact, I quit my job and I had worked without salary for a year and a half, working on and off with this hospital. And you learn very quickly that the guiding principle is a problem statement. It's not the technology at all. And as an entrepreneur, there is a laser focus on what exactly the problem is. When I was in the hospital, it was very clear to see that when somebody gets a heart attack, a stent gets put in. And I'm sure you've seen angiograms where you see these black lines, which are the arteries inside the heart, that is done by putting a radio opaque dye, and then you put yourself under an X-ray. But what you don't really realize is that dye is put using a catheter, and during the time the stenting takes place, that catheter is not in the heart, which means the doctor has to almost guess where he originally saw the blockage when the angiogram, the dye was in it. That particular guesswork is really down to the skill of the doctor. So what we wanted to do is to real-time locate the block without the dye. And what Angiometrics did was it used an existing simple wire that was always going to be put inside the heart. It's called a guide wire. And we converted that guide wire into a near-field antenna. And by looking at the antenna's near-field pattern, we were able to figure out whether the tip of the wire or the body of the wire was near a blockage or not. And that did not need the dye. And hence the doctor could navigate the stent to the correct place without the dye. So it's interesting because there was a real problem, which is locating the blockage. And the solution came from a very classical electromagnetic theory that no doctor could have thought through. And that's what I liked about that startup.
So were you able to replace the angiogram process or only the...
Yeah.
So no dyes anymore?
We did that. And it was...
Okay, wonderful.
No, the technology allowed us not to use the dyes. But, what happens is that people still use the dye to originally see the blockage carefully, because doctors are creatures of habit. They like to use the dye to see the blockage properly, and they do that. But when they are trying to put the stent, when they never had the dye and they were going blind, with our technology, you don't go blind. You actually see. So it's an augmentation rather than a replacement of a technique.
So they have what they always had, and they have something more on top of it. How did the journey go? You started off by talking to a cardiologist, you said, in Belgaum. And then how did the journey unfold?
When you go in there and you see, my God, there are so many problems that can be so easily solved with technology. And you sort of talk to this mentor doctor of mine. There are so many interesting problems we ran into there. And for me, it was what to choose rather than if I have to choose. And that was how I landed into an entrepreneurial journey. I cannot tell you that I was walking in thinking that I was going to be an entrepreneur or that sort. I think I was an accidental entrepreneur.
How did you get the idea of using a near field antenna to solve this particular problem?
Those of us who have patents will tell you something that's very personal, which is, when you finish a patent, you come up with a beautiful story how he invented this and it's all written up in a nice patent. The reality of the situation is nobody knows. It one day popped up in your head. And from then onwards, you're trying to explain in some nice logical fashion with a nice bow as to how you invented it. And that is true for this. I have absolutely no idea how it happened. But the only thing I could say is that, this wire goes in. And, there must be some way to use the wire. And then I honestly can't tell you the sequence. And even if I cook up one, I guarantee you it will be Yali. I don't think that's the way it happens. I think the process of invention is a mystery. It's almost godly. And it happens just like art is or music is. You can't really find its origins.
So what were the hardest challenges along the journey, both technical and non-technical?
The technology part was probably first year. And the rest was just business and engineering. No longer fun stuff.
So in the first year, you had basically got the idea that turned into the product, right? You'd figured out that you could use near fields and the guide wire as an antenna to figure out where the arterial block was. And then you had to engineer that into a product. What were the challenges there?
You go find the guide wire, you figure out a way to get the near field to be measured using wires inside a guide wire. And then you create benchtop models with tiny arteries and put blockages in it and figure it out. And you get the math to work right. Because that is not a statistically
How did you mimic the materials exactly?
There are things called electrophysiological catheters, very expensive ones. And they have little electrodes at the end of it, and you can use that to touch inside the people's hearts. And I've actually seen it and played with it. And you measure the ECG from inside the heart. So I basically stood outside a doctor's office for, I am pretty sure, weeks, until he took pity on me and gave me an old electrophysiology catheter, which is not a wire, but a catheter, which is fairly thick. So I scaled everything up, created a tube which has insulating walls, and created a little plaque inside of that, filled it up with a solution that mimics blood, took this catheter inside, and started doing the math to see if the math will hold up. And the math held up. And then we did experiments we created the wire. We did experiments on pigs, 10, 11 pigs. And then we got permissions to do experiments in more elaborate animal models. And to the point where pig is very close to a human heart. And we did exactly what an angiogram would have done. And we were able to show that the math did hold up.
So having done all that, having mimicked everything, having tested your math and your signal processing and your image processing, then the process of trials on human beings would again be an order of magnitude harder than that, at least.
I want the problem statement from technology. because I think that is an even bigger issue. As an entrepreneur, there is a whole lot of problems that happen in business development or go to market, which are completely out of your control. It is a lot to do with human reactions and human frailties and things that are no longer logical. And as an entrepreneur, that is really where the biggest risk actually sits. So I sort of divide an entrepreneur's journey into controllable risk and uncontrollable risk. And technology, in many ways, is a controllable risk. Your brain can't figure it out most of the time. Business development or business problems are completely uncontrollable. What the ecosystem is going to do to you is completely uncontrollable. The worst thing you can do, and frankly, this is one of the biggest lessons of angiometrics, is never, ever compound the two. Don't ever go build a startup which has a humongous technology risk and a humongous go-to-market risk. Together, it'll bury you.
So once you had the trials done, how did you go about trying to sell the product?
Yeah, I wish it were that sequential. It never is, right? I mean, you are building your technology at the same time, the people who fund, like Yali Capital is going to say, oh, when are we going to talk to the customers? I mean, that's a valid question to ask.
Right.
So you end up, in the initial days, you end up selling your credibility rather than the proof of your technology. That is the first phase of an entrepreneur. You have nothing but your credibility to sell. And the first question you ask is, who is your customer? Who wants to pay you for what you've done? And the second question that you ask was, who ultimately benefits from the technology that you've created? And they need not be the same person. There may be a lot of people in between the person you sell to and the person who actually benefits from this. I'll give you this very example. The technology that we built is a technology that saves lives and hence saves money for ultimately the person who's paying for it. So in the United States, for example, it gives you better outcomes, which ends up saving money for the insurance company or the patient. But my customer is a medical device manufacturer because I'm not yet able to sell it with my brand. And so there is a distance between the person I sell to and the person who actually extracts the value out of it. That distance is what makes life very hard because, first of all, you won't be able to capture the value that you created.
Right.
You have to get your customer to bear some risk with you, and that is even harder. So the first part of the business is to notice how far away you are from the entity that is actually going to benefit from what you're doing. And that is, the further you are from that person, I would argue that start looking at your business model. Your business model might be flawed. You might have to change your business model to come closer and closer to the entity that actually is going to benefit from what you've built.
So in your case, the entity that would benefit is the very human, end user who would have a lesser rate of complications because the doctor wasn't able to find the blockage precisely. But that is a known problem in medicine where at that point, there is no real reasoning or logic or comparing A versus B. The patient or their loved ones can just believe what the doctor tells them. There is no option. So then you'd have to convince the doctor that, this is something to use.
Yeah.
And then the doctor isn't going to pick part A and part B and build a solution. The doctor needs a comprehensive solution from a medical device manufacturer. And therefore you have to sell to a medical device manufacturer. So you're at least 2 levels removed from your final customer.
Probably even more.
Or even more.
You're one more level, right? You have a medical device manufacturer in between who needs to be convinced that they will make money. So the way you think about this, that there is a financial beneficiary. In this particular case, it's the insurance company. And if you're self-insured, like most of us in India, it's you. You you're financially benefited by it, because it's very hard for anybody to convince any human being saying that if you do this, you will not have a complication 10 years from today. That people don't think at that level, because there's a sense of infallibility that we have, and we never accept it. Then, but the financial risk convincing is the insurance company. The medical risk convincing is the doctor, who doesn't stand much to gain by using your device. In fact, he may end up losing money because he uses the device. That makes it difficult. And these two people have to be convinced, no way out of it. And then you have to convince the third person, which is your medical device company that you want to work with, who will take you to the market, to say that, well, if you have this great technology, and if you convince these two people along with me, then you will make money. And by the way, hopefully you don't have a product that will get cannibalized because of my technology. Now you realize that, why do I have to do this? I'm making enough money with selling my devices. What problem are you solving for me? And the answer is very little, right? The threat that some other company will eat your lunch because I'm going to go to the next door and find another company, right? You notice that for each of the entities in this complicated ecosystem, you have a different value proposition. And you as an entrepreneur are going to go through this carefully.
Are there any stories you can share on how you dealt with all these various stakeholders?
Funnily, the financial part was easy. The doctor part was also easy. Medical device part was the hardest. I never thought that would be the case, but that was the hardest. Because I think medical device companies tend to be very old-fashioned. They're very happy where they are. There's very little incentive for startups to do it. And this is where I really thank the AI boom these days, because everybody's worried that everybody's going to lose their shirt because AI is going to eat them up. So they're all worried about not having the FOMO.
Good. So AI is not all bad. If you were to do all of this again, what would you do differently as a founder?
I would not conflate or compound my risk between both technology and go-to-market. I would prefer to do a startup wherein I have retired the technology risk almost completely, or it's manageable, and I would focus on the business risk as much as I can.
Okay.
I'm not saying you do that from day one. You do that in your home. Convince yourself these things can be made to work. Bootstrap as much as you can to retire that controllable risk as much as you can. And then get the help from anybody and everybody to get you through the uncontrollable business risk. That requires an army of people to help you through. That's what I would do differently.
Absolutely. So we have a similar view at Yali, where we look at every startup from what's your technology risk, what's your execution risk, and what's your business risk. And we would really love more founders to be as clear-headed as you are, that these are all different things and these need to be managed differently. What problems in the health sector do you think are fundamentally constrained by physics rather than computation? Yeah, at some point we are trading off physics with computation, right?
Can I change the word physics to science?
Absolutely.
Because there's biology involved.
Biology, chemistry.
When does science limit, fundamental science discoveries limit what can be done in medicine? The first thing we have to think about is that not think of it as one broad brush. So I'd like to break this problem of healthcare into two. Well, let me call it digital biology and digital physiology. And when I think of digital physiology, I think of disease diagnosis, disease detection, disease management, disease prediction, wherein the unit of operation, the basic unit of operation, is an organ or a human being, wherein you are trying to look at how an organ or a disease is detected, predicted, or managed on a human being. And hence, the canonical unit of operation, or where you're operating on, is an organ or even a human being holistically, rather than a biological molecule. As contrast to digital biology, wherein you are looking at how to create a new molecule that can have a huge effect on a human being later, but the unit of operation that you want to work on is a molecule, right? So that is what I call digital biology. And they are very, very different. Although they look like healthcare, they're entirely different. The temperament and the money and the time and all of these things are entirely different, and should not make the mistake of thinking all of that as sort of healthcare. That's not really a fair thing to do. So to answer your question, in my mind, digital biology is limited by science, a lot of it. And the best way to think about it is as the average. I mean, we all know Moore's law, wherein the price of a transistor is dropping at a very alarming rate. There is the inverse of Moore's law, which is called Eroom's law. It's Eroom because it's Moore written backwards. And it actually says that the cost of making a drug doubles every 9 years. And today, the cost of making a drug is $1.2 or $1.5 billion per successful drug. This is out of whack, completely out of whack. And why is that so? Because the ability to find the right drug, find target that will attack the disease and not create toxicity to the rest of it, is actually quite hard. And you find that, so that becomes a science problem. And then you find that it is very toxic after you've spent about $1 billion into it in phase 3 trial or phase 2 trial. And if only you had great ways of predicting what that would have done, you could have saved that effort. So digital biology, in my mind, is a very science-limited problem. And you'd see Grail or Roche or working on DNA sequencing. That's all great science. That's a science-limited problem. Computation has a role to play, but it is, very science. Disease management, disease detection, and disease prevention is much more, in my mind, a computation-related play. There are enough things out there in the world. If you could listen to it properly and hear it properly and hear it often enough, you can manage many of these digital physiology problems with the right kind of computation attached to it. So that's the way I would answer your question.
That is a very nice way of putting it. There's a lot that our bodies are trying to tell us if we only knew how to listen.
How often to listen.
Yeah. Is there something about health tech that you strongly believe that is different from what most people believe?
Most people believe when they walk into healthcare, especially if they're not in healthcare, think that, oh my God, there are so many shiny things in the floor that I can pick and run and suddenly make money out of it. But very soon you realize that most of it don't make money. And so the lure of a shiny object is extremely high in healthcare. And frankly, the problem that, venture capitalists like you would run into is to distinguish the fool's gold from real gold. Engineers are pretty bad at it because we are inherently drinking our own Kool-Aid. So people like you have to be the worst enemy to tell you, can't make money out of it.
Any shortcuts to figure out whether something will actually make money?
Get hold of the customer and ask, will you pay? Usually the question is easy to ask and the answer is also easy to get. But I think the tone of the answer is what gives you the real answer.
Questioning the answer is...
Yeah, questioning the answer, double-clicking the answer and knowing where are the boundaries that the customer will not cross. That is the art.
What is the frontier that excites you the most now?
I really like digital biology. I look at any exponential things that are going out of whack, like the Eroom's law we talked about before. I find that fascinating. Anytime there is an exponential, trust me, there is some nice technology that's going to disrupt that. And that will be huge, right? So to me, the real exciting part is drug discovery. What
So
can technology?
is there someone building an AI model that's going to predict whether a molecule is going to cause a particular reaction based
Yeah.
on all the data that we
Yeah.
have on clinical trials?
Yeah. The work is on. There are tons of people trying to do this. Getting the data is hard. Getting the right kind of data is hard. And making the right models to predict is even harder. And so it is a wonderful problem to go solve. The really good thing about that problem is that it's one of those cases that, you make a drug for curing lung cancer or something. My goodness, you don't have to go and you should have a trial that proves it. The value is very clear.
Right.
See, that's a great thing about science problems. The value becomes a lot clearer. Very
you don't
fast.
have that multi-layer sales problem.
That's right.
You can solve a disease. You can cure a disease. It sells itself.
It sells itself.
Do you think more people should be building AI models there?
I think so. I think more people should be trying to get more relevant data early in the drug discovery place. And there are lots of technologies can be made to work. Scale is important. Semiconductor chips, you asked me a question about semiconductor industry. You know what we are very good at scale. My goodness, we know how to make billions of things on one tiny little square centimeter. It's great, right? Nobody else in the world can even touch that level of scale that we can think of. We can even imagine.
Discipline in manufacturing. It's ill understood.
The difference between 99.7% and 99.8% is inbuilt in us. This is something the drug discovery team groups can learn a lot from.
The intersection of India, health, and AI. What do you think is going to happen, should happen? What's the potential there? What are the hurdles there? How is it different from the US?
I don't know if you were there in TI when Devi Shetty came and gave a talk about healthcare. And he made a statistics about the number of doctors required per 1,000 patients. And I think we are at least a couple of orders of magnitude away from what is required for the minimum. And at that time, his answer was, let's create a lot more paramedic so that we can manage it early, etc. That is still a humongous problem in India, problem in India. And what I really like about is that what AI does is to democratize the doctor. And it allows you to have a specialist in a person's or a nurse's phone without the specialist being there. And that changes our healthcare economics a lot. I mean, one perfect example is heart failure. Heart failure is the most expensive disease on the face of the planet today, much more than cancer is. If you catch it 2 weeks before you turn up in the hospital, an extremely small diuretic pill that makes you pee a little bit more can prevent you from turning up in the hospital. If not, you're circling the drain when you turn up in the hospital. That's the difference time makes. And this can be done. We are the best country to go figure that out. We have that infrastructure, right? And we know what primary care systems in a well-managed primary care, like for example, Kerala, where both of us come from, it's a beautifully working system. It works. When that distributed healthcare model works, you empower that with a virtual specialist with AI and the tools that allow you to reach each patient carefully. And don't forget, that part may be the limiting issue here. You can make a huge difference to the patients in India. In fact, I would almost say if you see a problem solution in the West, I'm not even sure if it ever works in India.
We have an entirely different system. Here's to the next generation of entrepreneurs building for, 1.5 billion people. So Venu, your journey from physics labs to building technology that keeps hearts beating, this is exactly the kind of founder story we started this podcast to tell. We hope that inspires a lot of founders. And, gentle listener, if this is the kind of conversation and that you like and this sparked something in you, share it with someone who's building in deep tech. We'll see you all again next time on the Yali Capital podcast. And thank you again, Venu. It was an honor talking to you, and it was as exciting as I hoped it would be.
I really appreciate the time you gave to listen to my story, and if I can make a difference, that would be great. And feel free to
Really
catch me if
appreciate
need
you
any
spending
questions.
time with us and making a difference to the next generation
Thank you.
of founders.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venu.